Hello and welcome to SharpC2 episode 10. As you can probably guess from the wireframe, in this episode we're going to start work on the client. Now, the design itself is obviously very heavily inspired by Cobalt Strike. I'm not much of a designer, so I don't know, this seemed just like the easiest thing to do. But also Cobalt Strike is a well-known piece of software. People are largely familiar with it. The design has kind of stood the test of time, I think. And I just think that this will make it easier for people just to pick up and be familiar with. So it probably doesn't need much explaining, but we're just going to have a standard menu bar at the top to access different functionalities. A grid view that will just have a gridded list of all of the agents. No idea if we're ever going to be able to do that funky graph view that Cobalt Strike can do and Covenant can do and some others can do. Maybe one day, that would be really cool to have. These will be selectable and right-clickable, and if you right-click one of these, it can pop up a context menu for different options. So interact will pop up another tab down here. So this line here will be a grid splitter where we can move it up and down to enlarge or shrink parts of the interface. And so we're just going to have this tabbed view here. Each tab will also have a context menu, so you can either close the tab or detach it into its own floating window. That's really helpful, I feel, for like the logs, like the event log and the web log and things like that. Not really thought about what's going to be in any of these menus yet. We'll just tackle those as we go. So what I've done, I've rearranged some of the code in the solution again. Every model that is pertinent to the API, I've moved into a different shared project here. So if you're writing an application that will consume an API, it's very typical for you to not have all of those original models. And things like Swagger are really good because you can use tools like AutoRest that will automatically generate code that wrap around all of the API methods, and they rebuild all of those models so you can serialize and deserialize requests from the API without too much hassle. And even though the SharpC2 team server has an API and has Swagger, I don't really feel like we need to go down the route of rebuilding that API because we can just use the original code really. And the type of project that I'm going to build is actually a WPF application. Now, as per my obsession with .NET 5, it's actually going to be the case. So like, even though this is a WPF app based on .NET Core, it's not actually cross-platform. You can't run WPF apps even in .NET Core on Mac or Linux. But in .NET 5, they are moving towards this multi-platform app UI. So with .NET 5, we will be able to create, it says .NET 6 here, but the evolution of .NET 5 and .NET 6 will be able to do proper multi-platform GUI applications. So what I'm kind of naively hoping is that I'll create this application, even though it says .NET Core, I'll be creating it with .NET 5, and then when this MUI stuff, when it reaches a point where it's actually ready, I'm hoping that, like I was able to just upgrade the team server from .NET Core to .NET 5 without even changing a single line of code, I'm hoping that I'll just be able to upgrade this project with minimal effort But that's no guarantee, but I'm going to take the gamble for now. We'll just call this client. And in the properties, it's already .NET 5. Oh, no. So if we launch it real quick, we have the not very exciting main window. Now what I've got here is this hot reload is available, which means I can actually make changes to the UI and it will update in real time without having to, stop and restart the application. So in main window, for example, I can do SharpC2 and you can see it changes straight away. So that can be really useful when building things. But also we have this graphical view of what we're building as well. So this will be the main window, which is going to look like this. So we have our grid. And one interesting thing to note about these kind of like WPF apps is you can only have one parent element on a window. So I can't have a grid here and create another grid. It kind of tells you to go away. So everything that we build has to be within a kind of parent grid. So we can split the grid up into columns and rows. I don't think we're not going to have any columns, so we'll just split it into rows. So we'll say row definitions and add a new row definition. We'll say height is auto. So this first row will be for the menu bar. And auto means that it will basically resize itself to fit whatever you put inside it. I'll add a new row and the height will be a star. And a star basically says consume as much space as you can. So in our view here, you can't really see it very well. But this is basically saying that this row is taking up the whole space. I'll add another row and I'll set this to a fixed size of 5 pixels, and you can see it just appear at the bottom here. And this will hold the line for our grid splitter, the one that we're going to be able to click and drag up and down. And I'll add a final row, and that will contain this tab view. So you can see here how it's starting to take shape. So we'll have the agent stuff at the top, a grid splitter here that we can drag up and down, and then the tab view. So for the menu, I'm going to create a dock panel. it's going to be in grid row 0, so the first one. And within the dock panel, we're going to have a menu. And we're going to pop it at the top. And then within here, we're going to have menu items. The first one can just be SharpC2. You can just see it pop in here. I can make that a bit bigger. Too big? 100%. Make this a bit bigger as well. Another menu item, what was I calling them? I'll just do about. And then actually within these ones, we can have sub-menu items. So this can be exit. And we can actually, let's rename this one to help. And within it, we can have something called about. We could also have links to the GitHub wiki and whatever other documentation we want to create. So if I save this and run it, here we go, working menu. I can try and leave that running as we go. The next item we're going to have is a data grid, and this will be on grid row 1. And we really haven't got anything to fill it with yet, because we obviously need to fetch the data from the API. So I'll just leave it with nothing in for now, but you can sort of see how it's filled in here. The next item is our grid splitter, and this will be on grid row 2, and its horizontal alignment will be stretch. So now you can see how we can click this, drag it up and down. And because these other height definitions are star, this is why they kind of auto stretch, they auto fill the space as it changes. Now we might want to put some minimum heights on here so you can't basically make it vanish like that. Like I can't even, okay, I can get it back just. But maybe a minimum height would be good there at some point. And then finally, we'll put a tab control, and this will be on grid row 3. Now we haven't got anything to put in there yet either, so I'm just going to leave it kind of as it is. I don't think it will render anything interesting. Not really. So that's the main view. What we also want is a login view. So let's create a new folder called views, and another one called view models. So I'm going to try, now I know absolutely nothing about making GUI applications. we're going to try and follow this model view model where the actual view, like this main window view, doesn't actually contain really any information about what it should be rendering. Like this, hard coding these header values is not MVVM, so we shouldn't really be doing this. But when it comes to things like the data grid, we obviously can't hard code agent values into the data grid. So we have to bind the values from the view model. I will show a really basic example of that on the login view. So let's create I think we could do a user control. Let's call this the connect view. We'll create a bunch of different rows. So I'm not sure how many we'll need, like 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 5 or 6, we'll see. And we'll also give this one some column definitions. And we'll give them a width, I don't know, 100 and 300 or something. We can obviously resize these as we go. Now I'll also point out that we're not going to be doing any styling, nothing to do with fonts, colors, you know, nice, having things nice and centered. I'm just going to be slapping elements on these views just to make sure that they work, and then when we're happy with them, then we can start doing like styles. So the first thing we'll put on here is a text block, and I'm going to put this in column 1 and row 0. Now I could put like text property here and say welcome to SharpC2, and you can barely see because it's in black, but welcome to SharpC2 is just up here in this view. But this is not MVVM. So instead of hard coding a text value, we can do this thing called a binding. And we're going to bind to a property on the view model. And we'll just call this property welcome or connect message. And then in view models, we'll create a new class and we'll call it connect view model. So I believe it's standard practice to have a view that's called like connect view, and then the view model will be connect view model. So in here we'd put a property string connect message equals welcome to SharpC2. And then in the code behind for the view, views have this property called a data context, and the data context for the connect view will be a new connect view model. Now if I go into app.xaml and change the startup URI from main window to views connect view, is it that way? Nope. Where's this? Oh, I put an extra curly brace. Okay. So I don't know how I've managed to change all of this, but you can see that it's actually opened the new view, and we've got welcome to SharpC2. So I wonder if it's because this is a user control and not. Let's close them. Let's create it as a window. Let's just put that text block on. And we'll just call this connect. Set the data context. I'm not sure if it has to come before or after. Connects view model. Okay, that's more like what I was expecting. Oh, come on. Okay, so let's get these definitions back in. And this was on row 0, column 1. So one of the, I guess, disadvantages of using this kind of binding is that you lose the preview, because it obviously doesn't know what this is yet. So you can't have that text kind of rendered on in this preview. So that's something to be aware of. So let's put some more text blocks on here. These will all be in column 0, and this will be in row 1. And I'm just going to hard code these. So this will be host. Port. Nick. Oops, easy. And pass. And then the text boxes. Text box. Grid column 1. This will be in row 1. And the text we have to bind to the view model so we can retrieve the value that the user is going to put in. So this will be a binding to host. Two, 3. And then the password boxes are more complicated. Because of security, you can't bind the value of a text box to a view model. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this password changed event, and we're going to define a new event handler. And then we have a button in column 1, row 5. And we need a new event handler for the click. Now again, there's a way to bind clicks to the view model rather than the code behind. But for now, we'll just use the code behind. Instead of button click, we'll call it login click. And we'll call the button connect. So now in the code behind for the view, we've got the events. This one is login click. So on this, let's define properties first on the view model. So this is string host. We can initialize some values so they display on the window. So we'll just say 001 string port will be 7443. That's the API port. The nick we can just call it neo because we're copying Cobalt Strike, and then the string pass. I'm just going to put in my A so I can just click login all the time without having to type in password, because the team server in debug mode sets the password to an A. So that's the view model. If we launch it now, we should see those values populated in the boxes, yeah. But I obviously didn't change these bindings, so this host, port, nick. Okay. So on this password change event, we're gonna do some really cheaty things. What I'm actually going to do is, so you can't bind the password box to the login view. So when the password value is changed, we're going to get the we can get our current data context, right? But the view model, because it's generated at runtime, you can't reference any of your properties, because it clearly doesn't know anything about the data context because it hasn't been set yet. So we have to use this this dynamic keyword, and what it does is it says right here, represents an object whose operations will be resolved at runtime. So if we know ahead of time a property that will be on the data context, we can define it here. Now the IDE Visual Studio won't autocomplete it because it doesn't know, but we know that the data context will have this pass property because we've put it here. So we're saying at runtime find this property, and we're going to make it equal the value of the password box. So the password box is the sender, which we have to do something like sender as password box. and then the property on that is password. So if we try that, put a breakpoint here and hit go. If I start typing some garbage, you can see the event is already triggered. So let's take that breakpoint off. And continue. So let's type in some nonsense. Hit that breakpoint again and hit, no, I can't do that, so let's type one more character. So the sender is the password box. The password field is here, which has our nonsense in it. And the data context, the password is now also in there as well. So that's how we're retrieving the password. So now on the login click, we actually need to do our logging in. So let's create a new folder, and we'll just call it SharpC2 API. And we'll create a REST class. So to actually consume the API, we're going to use some packages. We're going to have Newtonsoft, to serialize and deserialize the data. And I also like Sharp REST, is it? Or REST Sharp. So we'll make this public, and we're going to put a public static REST client, and we'll just call it client is a new REST client. And that's kind of it for that, really. I won't do it with a folder actually. Let's do client API. So I'm just going to have a separate class for each of the different kind of types of API. So we've got client API, agents API, listeners API, and things like that. So I'm just going to wrap the API methods within a class for each one, really. So this one will have a public static. It will return a client. We need to add this project as a dependency, and then we can say client authentication result is what it's going to return. We'll just call the method client login, and we're going to take in the host name, the port, the nick, and the password. We'll say that the REST client will assign a new base URL for the client, and this will just be HTTPS, the host, the port, we'll say, we'll disable the SSL checks for now. Sender, certificate, chain, SSL, policy errors. True. So this just basically tells it to like ignore everything. So whenever it tries to validate any of these things, it just returns true. We'll add a new default header, which would be content type application JSON. We only need to do these things once, which is why in the client logon might be a easy place to put it. So we're gonna say API request is a new REST request. And this will hit the API client endpoint. And it's going to be a post. We then need to add a parameter to it. And it will be the client authentication request. So we do JSON convert from Newtonsoft, serialize object, and we're going to serialize a new client authentication request. The nick is obviously just the nick, and the password is the password. And the parameter type is going to be in the body. Okay, I think that's correct. And then we'll do var API response is the REST client dot execute API request. And then the overall result is JSON convert deserialized to a type of client authentication results, and the data we feed in is the API response content. So this is now a client authentication result. So what we can do is just return that result. But what I'm actually going to do as well is say if the result is equal to success, as in we've obviously logged in successfully, then we're going to set a new header on the client and say authorization is bearer, and the bearer is the token. Okay, and now in our code behind, we can say client authentication results is equal to client API, client logon. Now the data, we have to fetch off the data context in this way, which is not really ideal. In this method, I'll move it to the view model at some point. So this will just be the host, the port, the user, oh I didn't call it user, I called it nick, and pass. And what we'll say is if the result was successful, then we're going to close this window, the connect window, and open the main window, right? So we'll just say the main window is a new main window. We'll then say the main window data context will be, we haven't set the data context yet, or we haven't got the class yet, so we'll say main window view model. So this will be a new main window view model. We can do this shorter. Yep. And we'll do main window dot show, and then we'll call close on ourselves. So we don't need that. If we fail, we'll want to pop up some sort of error message and say, hey, you failed. But I think for the purposes of this video, we can just get a successful login going. Yes, go away. I don't know why it does that all the time. Okay. Yep. They're failing a lot of builds. What on earth? Oh, do I have to add? Do I have to add comment as well? Okay, apparently, yeah. So let's put a breakpoint on the login click. So let's do an incorrect one first. So we can hover over these and see that they have resolved. So the host, port, nick, and the password is B, which is what I typed. Okay, so the result is bad password, which is what we expected. So we should just return from this and just nothing happens. If we put the A in, and hit connect, okay, should we just continue from here? No, we'll step through it. So we're initializing a new main window. we hit show, which I don't know if we can, so we can see that it's kind of opening here. And then we close our current one. And here we are in the main view. So let's see that in real time, just because. So now we need to do Neo 2 because we're still logged in. This kind of like log in, log off thing is, I haven't really worked out log off yet. But if I just put the A and then connect, boom, and there we go. So I think that about does it for this episode. In the next one we'll do some more work here, so we'll retrieve the agent data so we can display agents that are checking in. So I think that'd be quite fun. And maybe after that we'll work on some of the tabs. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.